The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker came out in 2003, which is 22 years ago. It's quite a long time for a video game to be around, and it's still widely regarded as one of the best video games to ever be made. It's been praised for its music, gameplay, beautiful visual art style, and all of that praise is well deserved. But I wanted to focus on something else in this game that caught my attention. I actually started a fresh save file of Wind Waker recently, just to play through this childhood favorite of mine. And as I was playing through, I made it to the first dungeon when I had a bit of a realization. I think that Dragon Roost Cavern in Wind Waker is a perfect Zelda dungeon, and let me tell you why. From the moment you step foot in Dragon Roost Cavern, the game's already teaching the player what to expect from a dungeon in this game, and also teaching the player what the game will expect the player to do in order to progress. For instance, take the literal very first room in the entire dungeon. You've got two bokoblins holding sticks that have been lit on fire, some lit and unlit torches, and a locked door that is currently barring you from progressing further. Now, the player's familiar with combat at this point and shouldn't have too much of an issue dispatching of the two enemies in this room, but then what? There's a locked door blocking your path and you don't have a key. Now, if you're already a Zelda fan, then you know how to solve the puzzle here, and this probably all seems pretty mundane, but if you'll bear with me and try to pretend you've never played a Zelda game before, I'll try to show you why this seemingly ordinary room is so well designed. First off, let's talk about the sticks that the bokoblins are holding. Now, these sticks are not a brand new element to the player. In the Forsaken Fortress, the player is required to pick up a stick and use it to bash this bokoblin to death, so that he'll stop operating a searchlight, which allows you to make it to the room where Link's sister is being held. This room in Dragon Roost builds off of that prior experience, but adds a new element: fire. When you enter the room, the sticks the bokoblins are holding are already on fire. Once they've been defeated, the player is free to pick up their weapons, just like you've already done before. From there, as the player is exploring the room, they'll notice this small raised area in between the two unlit torches. And just in case you still don't get it, the developers put an already lit torch in the room as well, partially to allow you to relight the sticks if they go out, but also to really drive the point home that there's something strange about the two unlit torches on the other end of the room. In one fell swoop, this room teaches the player that dungeons will require them to beat enemies in combat and solve puzzles in order to progress, that torches can be lit to unlock secrets, which is a pretty common trope in this game, and reinforced the fact that in addition to the tools the player has themselves, enemies can also provide the player with tools to progress. And it did all of that in such a simple and seamless way that even a small child with limited experience playing video games could figure it out. And I should note, since I beat this game as a child with limited video game experience. Now you might be thinking to yourself, hey, it sounds more like you're describing the design of a tutorial than a Zelda dungeon. And you'll be right. I think what makes Dragon Roost Cavern such a great Zelda dungeon is that it manages to be a fun and engaging gameplay experience while also serving as an entire tutorial level that's so seamless that I'll bet you didn't even think of it as a tutorial before I mentioned it right now. Usually when we think of tutorials, we think of the boring part of the game at the beginning, where we're told that we can press A to jump, or use the right analog stick to look around. A tutorial is something that you just have to grit your teeth and get through so that you can get to the actually fun parts of the game.
Problem is you gotta pay.
Die again.
You gotta pay the fun tax.
Yep. Nobody has fun until they finish the tutorial.
And believe me, Wind Waker has its share of kind of boring parts that you're forced to sit through so that the game can tell you how to play, like when Orca physically abuses a child for swinging a sword horizontally instead of vertically. But what isn't boring is the following announcement. This is Sturgeon, and as you can see from the size of his head, he is suffering from a severe case of encephalitis. Sturgeon unfortunately does not have much time left to live, and his final wish is for you, the viewer, to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and leave a comment. Doing those things will not improve Sturgeon's condition in any way at all, but it will help him find meaning through improving the lives of others in his final days. Thank you. But honestly, creating a well-designed tutorial is actually really difficult. A lot of discourse around tutorial design often gets simplified down to tutorial through gameplay good, tutorial where player told directly what to do bad. And while it might be ideal for every game to teach the player through a fun and engaging tutorial that is conveyed in the gameplay itself, that's just not always feasible or realistic. Sometimes a game's systems are too complex to realistically teach the player without just telling them explicitly how things work. And some players may be playing a video game for the first time and will need to be told about basic mechanics very directly. Which is why it's all the more impressive to me that it feels like just about everything in Dragon Roost Cavern is designed in such a way to guide the player to the intended solution without ever needing to just come out and tell the player directly what needs to be done. Let me quickly go through a few more examples of these mini tutorials in Dragon Roost to show you what I'm talking about. Take this room for example, where the player needs to use these jars of water to create platforms on the magma in order to cross. It's possible a player will just pick up a jar and toss it into the magma to see what happens, but if the player's just slashing at these pots like they probably have been the whole game up to this point, these pots are placed right at the edge so that when broken by a sword, the water lands on the magma and still creates a partial platform. Or how about this next room where the path forward is blocked by this wooden structure? The player can't get through using their sword, and doesn't appear to have any other tools at the moment to break down the barrier and get to the door on the other side. That is until this bokoblin jumps out of a pot and uses its much larger sword to break down the other wooden barrier in this room to try to attack the player. From there, the player can defeat the enemy and use its sword to get past the barrier and continue onward through the door, teaching the player that enemies can be hidden sometimes, and again reinforcing that you will sometimes need to use tools provided by enemies to make progress. How about this treasure chest that is placed conspicuously in the player's view at the beginning of the dungeon, but not accessible until after you've acquired the grappling hook, to help the player learn that acquiring new items may allow them to access treasure and areas that were previously inaccessible to them. Or how about the fact that the boss of this dungeon is literally just a giant version of these guys that you've already seen, so that even if you've never played a Zelda game and didn't know that the boss's large eyeball is probably a tweak spot, the enemies you've already dealt with would have taught you that anyway. Finally, I want to take a look at one more room that exemplifies everything we've been talking about up to this point. At first, this room seems simple. There's a barred door and an empty space in between two torches. All you have to do is get a stick, light the unlit torch on fire, and you'll progress somehow, just like in past rooms. Except, lighting the torch on fire only gives you a treasure chart, and doesn't remove the bars from the door. The player might be a little confused at this point, as what has worked in the past doesn't seem to be the solution here. The other notable thing about this room, however, is that there are a lot of pots. Like, way more pots than have been in any area in the past. Maybe the pots hold some kind of secret that will be helpful here. After breaking some pots, the player will find this bokoblin hiding inside one of them, but killing it still doesn't open up the door. Maybe there's something else the pots are hiding. In fact, there's this pot sitting high up on a shelf that looks pretty conspicuous, but how do you get it down? Well, if the player has talked to Orca or his brother back on Outset Island, they'll know that they can roll into the wall to break the shelf, sending the pot crashing down onto the ground, and revealing the final bokoblin hiding in this room. After it's been defeated, the bars will finally raise, and the player can continue on their journey. I like this room because it still rewards you for utilizing the knowledge you've gained prior. Lighting the unlit torch does grant you a reward, just maybe not the reward the player was expecting. It utilizes elements that the player has dealt with before, but presents them to the player in a way that forces them to problem solve and combine their curiosity and prior experience to find the way forward. At the end of all of this, maybe you still feel like none of this is really all that remarkable, but I wanted to draw attention to Dragon Roost Cavern's level design precisely because it seems so unremarkable on the surface. I think level and tutorial design are elements of a game that we often only pay attention to when they aren't implemented well. We've all been playing a game where we were forced to sit through a boring tutorial that went on for too long, or been stuck on a level because the game's expectations of the player weren't properly communicated. It's often the bad examples that stick out in our minds, while solid, unobtrusive level design can often go unappreciated. This quote from God from Futurama pretty much sums up my thinking about all of this. When you do things right, people won't be sure you've done anything at all. With the Switch 2 out now and Wind Waker being available to play through the Nintendo Classics service, I would imagine that a lot of people are revisiting this game or maybe even experiencing it for the first time. And I wanted to make this video to kind of show off that level design and tutorial design. I think these things can go underappreciated sometimes in a video game, but they are crucial elements of what makes a game feel good. The music, the art style, the controls themselves, if they're not implemented in a way that is fun and engaging, then it's going to be tough for players to get into the game and to enjoy it. So I think that element is part of what makes video games a very unique art form. The fact that it's interactive. A game is a conversation between you and the game designer, and they have to design their game in a way that teaches you how to play, shows you the best ways forward, and allows you to learn on your own. And for all of those reasons, that's why I think Dragon Roost Cavern is a perfect Zelda game, because it checks all of those boxes.